Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Ann Collins Goodyear, co-director with my husband Frank of the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. On behalf of our colleagues who comprise the Maine Art Museum Trail, we are delighted to welcome you this evening to this special program, Art, Belonging, and Home, featuring a conversation with Zoe Sahloul and Philippa Hughes, and musical performances by George Lopez. Tonight's event represents the second of 4 programs this spring organized by the Maine Art Museum Trail dedicated to addressing notions of home. As many of us continue to enjoy culture and virtual programs such as this one from home, and particularly as we look forward to the conclusion of the pandemic crisis, through vaccinations and the gradual reopening of institutions largely shuttered over the past year, we have a powerful opportunity to rethink what we mean by home. Above all, what will it mean to feel at home in the wake of the pandemic when we're no longer in our houses? What does it mean to experience a sense of belonging and community here in Maine and through the arts? Tonight's program focuses specifically on the experience of so-called new Mainers, individuals who have recently moved to the region from other parts of the country or the world. In some sense, of course, we are all now new Mainers as we begin to move forward into a world that has been radically transformed over the past 12 months. What stories will we have to tell? Tonight's program features the work of 3 special guests, together with the voices of leaders of 6 Maine art museums. We are delighted to welcome this evening Philippa Hughes, who leads Curiosity Connects Us, a partner in Looking for America, and Zoe Sahloul, executive director and founder of the New England Arab American organization based in Portland. The 2 have joined forces under the auspices of Looking for America, a new initiative exploring immigration and American identity in communities across the United States through public art, storytelling, and dialogues. Philippa and Zoe will discuss their recent collaboration, Gifts of Acadia. Philippa and Zoe will be joined by George Lopez, Beckwith Artist-in-Residence at Bowdoin College, and director of the Bowdoin Orchestra. George has long been an important partner with the Bowdoin College Museum of Art, enriching and strengthening our community through his popular Music at the Museum series. We also look forward to hearing from our colleagues and fellow Maine Art Museum Trail members, Jennifer Pye, Director and Chief Curator of the Monhegan Museum, George Kinghorn, Director and Curator of the Zillman Art Museum at the University of Maine, Jacqueline Teresa, Director of the Colby College Museum of Art, Dan Mills, Director of the Bates College Museum of Art, Chris Brownawell, Director of the Farnsworth Art Museum, and Frank Goodyear, my co-director at the BCMA. Each of the directors will speak to a work of art that has special meaning to them and to their institution. Tonight's program is intended to have a conversational framework and to be interactive. We invite you to share your reflections through the chat function, particularly in response to the prompts you will receive over the course of the program. We invite you to contemplate and to reimagine home with us this evening. For those individuals who would like captions, please take advantage of the live transcript button. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Philippa Hughes. Philippa?
3 days after the 2016 election, I was distraught, like many people in my solid blue bubble here in Washington, D.C. A lot of my friends curled up into a ball and couldn't get out of bed. But I decided that I wanted to ask my own questions of people who voted differently from me, and to not just hear what they thought through media or through a book that I read or something like that. I wanted to look them look them in the eye, face to face. And I was curious. And so I invited them over for dinner. This is my dining table right here. And so they came, 3 people who voted for Donald Trump came, and I invited a couple of friends who voted for the other person. And I thought we need a little balance so that, in case things got out of hand. And we had a conversation. Well, actually, what happened was, the second they came through the door, we started arguing. It was respectful arguing, but we literally argued from the very first moment until basically right before they left. But we left there feeling invigorated that, so many people had said, I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to talk to those people. And yet we did it, and we didn't kill each other. And so that was like kind of exciting. And so I did it again and again and again over the next 2 years. I wasn't trying to make a project out of it. I was just genuinely curious. And I was kind of like pretending like I was an anthropologist or something like that to learn. I wanted to learn and to also examine the ways I thought about the beliefs that I had around politics, etc. After a couple years, I teamed up with a friend who is the director of the Hyrick House Museum here in Washington, D.C. And we put on an exhibit that I curated called A Good American. And we asked 7 artists here in DC that were sort of at various levels of being American, so to speak, being immigrants, to respond to this question. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a good American? And we organized a dinner for 50 people from across the political spectrum. And that was when it became really interesting, because at that point I started to realize that people are not just red or blue, Republican, conservative, Democrat. There is a spectrum of political ideology, and there's so much nuance in the way people think. But yet we are forced into 2 camps, to vote one way or the other, when in fact we are complex individuals. And so we had this amazing conversation in this small museum here in DC with the artists who were part of this exhibit. People were able to ask questions. People were able to respond to not only to each other, but to the performances and to the art itself. And that became a turning point for me when I realized that art, it was that art could be the spark and the frame for these kinds of difficult conversations. I've been involved in the art world for, a couple decades now, but it just hadn't occurred to me that this was a way forward to think about very difficult political conversations. That led to a project called Looking for America. And that was a project in which we traveled around the country. We went as far as Anchorage, Alaska, El Paso, Texas, Sioux City, Iowa, and we organized art exhibits in each of these places with local artists responding to this question: what does it mean to be American? And we, again, organized dinners in all of these places to ask people to respond to that same question. And we were able to see what it meant to be American in all of these different places, how it could be different in El Paso, Texas versus Anchorage, and yet also how can we find the commonalities, our common shared experience in these conversations. As with many organizations, once COVID hit, we weren't obviously able to travel anymore and bring people together in person. And so those conversations went to Zoom and actually became almost better in a way, because then we were able to bring people across different kinds of divides, our geographic divides. So people from Anchorage and Alaska and Sioux City could be in the same conversation and to share in those ways as well. So all of that is to say is that we started to understand more deeply the power of art to spark those kinds of conversations. And we started to realize that it wasn't just, art, things that hang on the walls, but it was like the feeling and the ritual of the experience that made it possible to have these conversations. And that's why it was important for us to hold these conversations in museums. We based a lot of our our theory of change on research that was done at the Greater Good Science Center out of Berkeley, in which they've done a lot of research around the idea of awe and how awe can create a sense of curiosity in us. And when we have more curiosity, we feel more connected to our fellow man. And art is one of the best ways of creating this sense of awe in each other. And so we developed this whole project around the idea of how can we create a sense of awe in each other so that we can begin to have the kinds of conversations that will help us feel more connected to one another. The other thing that I've been thinking about in terms of why we used art, why we decide to hold these events in museums as opposed to any other kind of venue, it is because museums for us became these, well, I liken it to libraries in the sense that libraries were called palaces for the people. They became these anchors for our communities, and they became these places that signaled the grandeur of our human experience and the reason. And when you signal those things, it makes us again feel the sense of being part of something greater than ourselves. And so that's why we wanted to. That's what we were trying to create, is a sense that we're part of something bigger. And it is this sense of feeling part of something bigger that makes us feel more connected to one another. We are also base a lot of our project on the idea of social contact theory. Social contact theory tells us that just merely being in contact with another person that is different from yourself can decrease levels of discrimination between people. And so we're very interested in the idea that even superficial contacts, as long as they're done eye to eye, face to face, can decrease feelings of discrimination, but also increase feelings of connection, of feeling like there's a sense of belonging in each other. The third element of our process is through the element of storytelling. We always begin each event, each dinner with storytelling. We know through social science that people, when we debate or we argue about facts and figures, we can't convince anybody of anything throwing facts and figures. And in fact, a lot of social science tells us that the more facts and figures you throw at somebody, the more you could actually push them further into their ideological corners. The only thing that has ever been proven to actually shift people, even microscopically, is through storytelling. And so we begin each event, each process, not only with the art and the experience of art and in provoking awe, but with telling a story. And so what we ask people to do is in the Looking for America project, ask people to tell a story about what it means to them to be American, to feel like you belong in America, or to feel a sense of belonging. And we ask them to tell these stories through an object, because many people find it difficult to talk about themselves. And so if we can tell stories through objects, it eases people into the conversation. So in every gathering, I specifically tell people, like, we're not even gonna talk about politics until way far into the program, because we need to know each other as humans and not as avatars first before we can even have those kinds of difficult conversations. And so I thought I would share a story of my own with you all. This is a little hula girl. It's one of those, old kind of 70s things that sits on the dash and you're supposed to, on your car dash, and it's a little hula girl. And I decided to share this object because I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. It's the former capital of the Confederacy. And my brother and I were the only Asian kids in our school our entire lives. It was a very self-segregated society, black and white. And so we were like these weird kids that didn't belong in either side. And I grew up my whole life not feeling like I belonged anywhere. And in fact, I never knew any Asian people other than my family until I went to college. And then even when I went to college, I sort of avoided the Asian people because I wasn't even used to hanging out with them. And I don't even speak an Asian language. And so but at the same time, I always wondered if that was where I could be, except even they sort of rejected me because I'm biracial. And so to Asian people, I'm like not really Asian, and to white people, I'm not really one of them either. So even in that instance, I never felt like I belonged. And then years later, as an adult, I went to Hawaii for the first time. And while I was there with some friends, when we went to the grocery store to get some groceries for our week there, I was given the discount, the locals discount. They didn't even ask me who I was or anything. They just automatically gave me the discount. And I thought that was I thought they had made a mistake. And so I asked, so when I asked her about it, she said, oh, whoa, yeah, that's locals discount. Then we went to a movie. And at the movie theater, I got the locals discount. They didn't even ask me, they just gave it to me. And it was the first time I'd ever felt like I actually belonged somewhere, based purely on the way that I look. And that was one of the most amazing feelings I'd ever had. And I've always, it just stuck with me that that's what I want. And maybe I can never really have it unless I move to Hawaii, I guess. But that's what I want for all people, for myself, for all people, is for all of us to be able to feel like it's no big deal. We just can exist without wondering all the time how I will fit in. And so those are the kinds of stories that people told during these dinners. And it was so amazing. And we've collected those stories. We've made drawings of those objects, recorded people telling those stories, and shared them with others. And so when we can share those kinds of stories with one another, that is the beginning point for actual humanizing conversations between us. And so I hope that that's what we'll be able to explore tonight in terms of belonging, is what are the things that make us feel like we belong, that make us feel like this is home for us. So thank you so much for letting me tell you that story. And I'm going to turn it over to Zoe. And I'd love to encourage our audience, when you feel the spirit, to tell us the story in the chat of a time when you feel belonging, or when you felt at home, and what kind of object might have helped you feel that way. Zoe?
Excuse me. Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to use the space tonight to share my story as a new Mainer. This is a picture of Beirut, where I was born. My name again is Zoe Sahloul, and I was born in Beirut, Lebanon. This is my mom and my family. I watched my parents live happily with big dreams for their 7 children and the successful future of the whole family. They lived in a place that represented the fusion of East and West and its tradition and modernity, which earned the Lebanese capital the nickname Paris of the Middle East. In this picture, I'm the one low there. I was 7 years old. And in this picture that kept being part of my journey, as you can see, its condition. This is a picture in our apartment in Beirut. It was my last picture for 20 years that I show I was happy, hearing about the big dreams from my parents. In Beirut, as a little child, I had my own dreams that I needed to pursue and complete, but unfortunately failed to. From my heart, I send greetings and kisses to Beirut and its sea and standing rock. At the age of 7, the war started, and for 20 years, the air became the taste of fire, smoke, and ashes. Suddenly, my proud city turned off its lights and lanterns. It had shut its door and it became alone in the night, alone with the night. For 20 years, I learned how to survive the darkness in Beirut, the place where in order to survive, actually, you have to learn how to be silent with no voice. You are trained to cheat death and celebrate every day, one at a time. You're powerless when dreaming becomes the only power that you can own, the only power that transforms your own sorrow and pain into strengths to dare to change. You're broken when a country does not embrace its people and crashes their dreams and hopes and steals their precious ones in the name of oppression and power. You're homeless when the only thing left to do is to leave to an unknown destination without anyone you know. I'm grateful that I started my journey with my sweetheart, that we fell in love when we were 16, and husband today. What is home? My home is where memories grow. When I first got to Maine, I was still grieving the loss of my homeland, loss of my family, neighbors, friends that I left behind. I felt like a bird with a broken wing, looking for support. In Maine, I found that our community was filled with warm and welcoming people that wanted to know us, pray with us, understand the customs we brought from Lebanon. The weight of their kindness knocked down walls of isolation and let light into our world. Today, and since NEAAO was founded in 2016, when I welcome new Mainers, I replicate that same warmth and kindness. I strive to be the support they need to take flight. At NEAAO, our mission is to build the bridge between cultures, and this cannot be a one-way street. It will not be complete without all of us coming in unity. I'm sorry, I moved my notes. Coming in unity to help our neighbors and community. Proudly, in 2019, we were awarded a national award from Welcoming America and also a grant from the Onion Foundation to make this project possible. Together, Home is Here, a project that provides mobile outreach through use of NEAAO's 35 feet RV. This is easily recognizable vehicle, wrapped with colorful images of children of all races, representing the diversity in Maine. The RV will visit public sites to draw new Mainers and longtime residents together in team building projects that promote mutual understanding using arts and music to resolve conflict and fear and open the opportunity to recognizing the contribution that we all make to help our neighbors feel more included and our community more welcoming to new Mainers and to everyone who calls our community home. Isn't this a value we can all share after all? Whether we were born here or not, whether we are in Maine as refugees or as storm survivors, or whether we speak English fluently or just learning it, we all want the same thing, the freedom to speak, to pray, to raise our children with hope and safety to pursue their full potential. That's what binds us as a community and defines our democracy. We all carry around unconscious beliefs about people we don't know based on probably what we saw on television or heard in the media. We commit to doing our best to see each person in front of us for their own unique strengths and individual qualities. And even if we disagree, we commit to finding common ground to build from. This vision, and with the power of art to make social change, we can create a culture of inclusion where question can be asked without fear of judgment, and all are encouraged to share lived experience. Together Home is Here is a project to help support different communities in different areas of Maine, where our stories can be shared to create an equal opportunity for children in these areas to use art, music, and learn theater. At NEAAO, we truly believe that each of us has the right to grow and thrive in the place we call home. If I can help you with that, I would be honored. Thank you for listening to my story.
Good evening. Thank you for that remarkable tale and personal narrative, Zoe. Home has been a particularly complicated, often confusing, and aspirational idea for me in my own life. My parents were immigrants from Belize, Central America, to New York in the early 60s. And having grown up in Brooklyn as a young boy, I was in a very multicultural environment myself. My mother and I became rather nomadic after my parents divorced, and home became a varied series of train stations, back seats of cars, rentals, hotels, and wherever we found ourselves. But she always had a great spirit, my mother, and so I felt whenever I was near her, that's where home was. I've lived in many parts of the world, here in Europe, been to the Far East, and I was powerfully moved just a few years ago when I was invited to play at a conference at Tulane University in New Orleans. It was a conference about the global problem of displaced persons and refugee camps around the world. It's particularly prescient that I'm playing this work tonight for you from the great Syrian-American composer Karim Rustam, who composed these pieces as a response to the terrible wars of 2012 and continuing in Syria. Aleppo is the largest city in northern Syria, or in Syria in general, with wonderful history. And I wanted to read briefly from Karim's introduction to give you some context. Quote, "To speak today of the richness of the arts and culture in Aleppo is to speak in the past tense. After the non-violent uprising of 2011 slid into a devastating war, nothing in Aleppo remains the same. Aleppo was a city for many things: wonderful cuisine, 7 miles of covered markets, the warmth of its people. And Aleppo was also known for its music. In writing this set of piano pieces, I hope to share some of Aleppo's musical treasures in a new setting, one that hopefully complements the richness of this tradition, but also avoids Orientalist cliches. Despite the very Aleppian flavor, 2 of the songs were composed by Egyptian composer Sayed Darwish. Darwish's songs are so universally known and loved in the Arab world that non-Egyptians often claim his melodies as their own. I would like to perform for you the 4th of this 5-movement set, titled The Silenced Guardian. Inspired by a beautiful sketch and drawing that you just saw of the citadel in Aleppo, considered, if not the oldest, one of the oldest castles in the world, going back to the 3rd millennium BC. Karim writes, Syrian-Armenian-American artist Kevork Murad very generously donated the cover illustration of this folio, a charcoal drawing of the medieval Aleppo citadel. This movement is a meditation on Kevork's evocative drawing.
The power of silence. Thank you very much, Philippa, Zoe, and George, for sharing those beautiful and moving reflections on what we experience and mean by home, dislocation, and perhaps also developing strategies to relocate ourselves in the world, even as we perhaps try to find where we feel our true community is. Being together with you, although we're here in cyberspace, I have the powerful sense of being together in a space where we can experience great art and the wonderful feelings of connection and openness that come with that. So thank you so much. And indeed, one of the things that I take particular pleasure in being a part of the art world professionally is the way in which art does create ties that bind us to one another, that open up new stories, that stimulate curiosity, and perhaps even sometimes help us find answers. And on that note, I'm delighted to have an opportunity to invite to the floor 6 of my fellow Maine Art Museum Trail directors, each of whom has kindly agreed to share a particular work in their collection that has special meaning for them. I'm going to invite Jen Pye, the director and curator at the Monhegan Art Museum, to share her thoughts about the work of Samuel Truscott. Jen?
Hi, thank you, Anne. So the artwork I'd like to share with you is one of the fish houses on Monhegan around the turn of the 20th century. And the painter is Samuel Peter Rolt Truscott, and he was Monhegan's first resident artist. Truscott was an English gentleman, and he immigrated to the US as a young man. He spent a few decades based in Massachusetts, mostly in the Boston area. And then in 1892, he was introduced to Monhegan. The following summer, he returned to the island and he purchased a fisherman's house. And like so many people who live on Monhegan now, he just began spending more and more time on the island until finally he joined the community as a year-round resident in 1902. So Truscott's move to Monhegan was especially significant because in 1900, the island wasn't much of a tourist destination. The residents were mostly descendants of the original settlers, people who'd fished with them, and lighthouse keepers. No one simply chose to move to this island 10 miles off the coast of Maine because they liked it until Truscott. And he chose to make his home on Monhegan, and he painted the island in all of its seasons and its moods. And so in this work, Truscott painted a fisherman at the end of the day. The moon is rising in the east over the backside of the island, and the sun is setting in the west. And the sun is reflecting in the fish house windows, and the fisherman is in the shadow cast by the neighboring island of Manana. And in this simple scene, Truscott really captured the daily rituals of island life and the dramatic beauty of this place that both he and the fisherman he depicted called home.
Jen, thank you so much for those reflections. And we know that many individuals listening from their own homes are probably finding their own thinking stimulated about works of art or objects that are especially meaningful for you and carry forward this notion of home. So again, we just want to invite you to join in the conversation through sharing your reflections in the chat. And on that note, I am going to turn the floor over to my colleague, Chris Brownowell, who directs the Farnsworth Art Museum. And Chris, we were all delighted to hear that the Farnsworth now is going to be providing a home to a wonderful group of paintings by the Wyeth family. And we're thrilled that you've chosen to speak about a work by N.C. Wyeth. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Anne. wanted to introduce this painting. It's been in the press, as Anne suggests, the last couple of days. It's an extraordinary canvas, probably painted between 1933 and 1934, oil on canvas, and it could have been painted by any number of early 20th century American artists. This one happens, of course, to be painted by N.C. Wyeth, known primarily as being an illustrator of his time. This, of course, is not an illustration, but it's an approach to painting that N.C. pursued when he wasn't doing his commission work, to break from the confines of illustration and something he longed to be recognized for. This is such an iconic Maine scene. It fits squarely within the mission of the Farnsworth Art Museum, celebrating Maine's role in American art. This is a portrait actually of the John Teal family who lived in Dark Harbor on Islesboro. NC painted the family on 3 occasions, and this painting requires really a deep look. You can look at this wonderful landscape and these figures in the foreground at the edge of the sea, but you have to look a little closer. You see these sort of hollow, indifferent gazes of the man and the woman, and you have this very warm, sort of robust look to this very young girl. And I suspect, we've all felt this way over the past year. And, as we're going through the images and thinking about which to present, I felt this one certainly sort of encapsulated several things. One is obviously the challenges that we all dealt with, I'm sure, over the past year, looking out over the sort of the sea of uncertainty and trying to figure out which way to navigate forward. So this is one of 27 major works that were given to the Farnsworth Art Museum, as Anne mentioned, this past month. And these are on view. They'll begin to, we'll open the show on May 15th. Thanks, Anne.
Chris, thank you so much. And we look forward to the chance to see the work in person. Thanks for sharing those reflections. I'm now going to turn the floor to George Kinghorn, who's the director and curator of the Zillman Art Museum at the University of Maine. George, we're excited to hear your reflections about Berenice Abbott.
Yes, thanks so much for having me join you this evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. The Zillman Art Museum has a number of works in the collection by Berenice Abbott, and I'm pleased to share a few words on this particular work, which has a special meaning to the museum's photography collection. It was given to the museum after Berenice Abbott moved from New York City to Maine. The work is titled Night View, New York, also called New York at Night, in 1932. And it has a special place because Berenice Abbott moved to Maine to set up a home here. And it's in striking contrast, this environment, to the life that she led in Maine. She lived out her final years in Maine, specifically in Monson, Maine, a very rural part of Maine. To share just a bit about the work, it was taken in 1932, around then, the shortest day of the year, on an upper floor of the Empire State Building. And it was taken at a time where the office workers were still, they were still at work and their office lights were still on. And she did that with the camera placed up against the glass in an upper floor. As we all know, Maine has such a draw for so many artists that come to our state from moving from much larger markets, and they're attracted here for the natural beauty, quality of life, the ability to work. And that was certainly the case for Berenice Abbott. She also moved to Maine for health reasons as well, and first set up a home in Blanchard, Maine. This particular work was created prior to the largest city for which she's most known, Changing New York City, Changing New York, which was part of a New Deal federal arts project that began in 1935. That's when she started with the project. documenting New York's changing landscape and her most known body of work. After her move to Maine, she did do a many different series, including a portrait of Maine that was a book published also in 1968. And she held Maine and its people very close to her heart, along with the people in Blanchard and Monson that was eventually her home. So thanks so much for allowing me to share a little bit about Berenice Abbott and this wonderful work.
George, thank you so much for your comments. And I think they're a wonderful reminder of how this notion of home gets transplanted from place to place. So thank you for your comments. And I now would like to welcome Jacqueline Teresa, who is the director of the Colby College Museum of Art, who will speak about the work of Zilia Sanchez. And Jackie, I'm looking forward to your comments. I know you told us that there was a great story connected with this beautiful painting, and we look forward to hearing about it.
Thank you so much for having me here, and it's a pleasure to hear other colleagues' takes on artworks in their collections. And I have to say that this afternoon, this artwork took a new sort of meaning for me in the sense of the swirling. That's very much how I feel right now, just with so much going on in our country and the news of the verdict and all the feeling that unleashes, which is part of what art does. I think it helps us sometimes see ourselves and put form into things that are hard to express. This painting is by an artist who is originally from Cuba and has been living in Puerto Rico since the early 70s. And I will say that this is one of the very, very first artists that I, as a young child, became aware of. I was taking classes at a place in San Juan where I grew up, at the Liga de Estudiantes de Arte de San Juan. And that was an art center that did exhibitions of contemporary artists. And possibly this artwork was in the exhibition that I saw in, I believe it was 1978, when she had a solo show in the art center. And so the reason why I chose it in terms of thinking about home was because in my first days working at the Colby Museum back in October, I walk into one of our galleries and I see this work. And I immediately recognized it as a Zilia Sanchez work, because as I was growing up, I was always perplexed by this artist's work. I was drawn to it, I mean, to the point that I remember that exhibition, that I saw at the age of, 8 or 9. And at the same time, I never really liked the work. It kind of confused me. It was abstract, it was sensual, it was structural. And here it was. And so I felt like I had found a piece of home right there in the galleries of the Colby Museum. And, Zilia Sanchez is known for pioneering these sorts of works from her days in Cuba and all the way, she's now 93. And she's only very recently come to be known in this country. And the title of this work, I love that the title doesn't quite translate. It's Black Moon with Tattoo, but in Spanish, lunar also refers to a birthmark. And so I love that this is both a kind of planetary, cosmic kind of image, and at the same time, very much about the human body and the skin. So when I was asked to select a work, I felt that I needed to go back to my roots. Thank you.
What a beautiful story. And I love the idea that you found a little piece of home precisely through being at the museum. Absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
And I'm now going to invite our colleague, Dan Mills, who is the director of the Bates College Museum of Art, to speak with us about a beautiful piece by Ashley Bryan. Dan?
Thank you, Anne, and thank you everyone for being a part of this. Yes, this is Beautiful Blackbird, a cutout paper collage by Ashley Bryan, and it was featured recently in our Let's Celebrate Ashley Bryan exhibition, and is one of actually dozens of works given by the Isaacs in 2019. The book this is from and this artwork is inspired by a story of the Bantu people in Zambia about birds of all colors of the rainbow coming together and saying the blackbird is the most beautiful of all. As a boy, Ashley often visited the library and rarely had any opportunity to identify with African Americans in the books that he read. In the dozens of books he's illustrated, written, or illustrated and written, he's made it his life work to change this and to make stories in which African American children could connect and feel at home in his books. I spoke with Ashley today, actually. He told me that making these works was so important to him and that he grew up with so many folk tales and fairy tales where black, as he said, was a lousy color. And he takes the story further than the original folk tale. After all of the birds sing in unison, Blackbird is the most beautiful one. They also ask Blackbird to share his color with them. So he paints some black onto all the other birds. And when this is done, he has shared black with all of them. And they all sing in unison, "Black is beautiful, uh-huh." Ashley, who will be 99 this summer, has lived a part or full-time on Cranberry Island for most of 8 decades. He plans to return home to Maine in June. He's been in Texas since the pandemic with relatives. And by the way, he asked me to send greetings and his love to our museum friends. He made his home here and his homemaking by creating in his extraordinary voice and sharing educational and inclusive work such as this, I think contribute to being at home with yourself, with others here in Maine and throughout the world. Thank you.
Dan, thank you so much for those beautiful remarks. And what a wonderful way to think about color and form and the stories that those qualities have to share with us so powerfully. Thank you so much to each of my fellow directors for sharing some of the many stories that their museums hold about home and connection and belonging. And of course, that is true of all of our Maine Art Museum Trail institutions. So we very much hope that you will all be back to visit us soon in person, and of course, in the meantime, online. I now want to turn the floor back to my colleague, George Lopez, who is going to share with us some further musical thoughts about notions of home and belonging.
Thank you, Anne. As I reflected on tonight's theme of home, I realized this has been a very significant theme for me for a number of years now. And my work with Anne and Frank Goodyear at the Bowdoin Art Museum in creating musical experiences in relationship to the exhibits that are presented there has been a significant part. I grew up for a time with my mother in Belize and my grandparents. And Belize is a very multicultural and eclectic culture and nation. There's a long-standing nourishment of a Nigerian tribe called the Garifuna, who established themselves in Belize over 200 years ago as part of a sort of refugee movement from Cuba in 1802. So they've been there a long time, and their festivals and dances and songs have become a part of Belizean culture. It's very much a melting pot of Latin America. The only country that speaks English as a first language south of the United States. My culture is, although I have a Spanish sounding name, Lopez, my culture is really Mayan with some Spanish mixed in. But there's a deep-seated sense of African dance and song, both in my personal culture and in my family's. When I did live in Texas myself as a child, I had the fortune of playing the piano in a Black Pentecostal church. And spirituals were a big part of that. It gives you a very different experience of faith. And church is very much home for the African Americans who were brought here from overseas against their will. Wade in the Water is a very well-known and seminal African American spiritual. Published, although in 1901, it's thought to be much older than that, and used as a kind of signal during the slave trade to help slaves know to go into the rivers so that they won't be tracked by dogs. The words itself, wade in the water, God's going to trouble the water, speaks to the end of times as well as looking to a possible heaven after hell. Margaret Bonds, the extremely gifted prodigy of the early part of the 20th century, African-American composer, pianist, arranger, grew up in Chicago, was very well educated at Northwestern, where she experienced extreme racism, not being allowed to live on campus like everybody else. She had to live off campus, which made her studies particularly difficult. After graduating with honors and getting her master's, she moved to New York City, where she had a wonderful and long-lasting collaboration with the great Harlem Renaissance poet Langston Hughes. Together, they made many, many songs, which are sung even today. So I would like to play Margaret Bonds' fantasy on Wade in the Water, which she called Troubled Water. thank you. If you're really with the moment, there's a sense of timelessness. The great American philosopher Jacob Needleman calls this a liminal moment, a kind of invisible portal through which we can imagine something else, something new, something renewed. And so it's after the concert, after the music, immediately after, that we can find those portals to the future of what art and music can be. We'd welcome your reflections in the chat on everything that you've heard tonight. And I thank you for your participation for this really remarkable evening, and to my honored colleagues as well. Thank you.
As we conclude this evening, I want to thank each of our presenters and participants for the stories and artworks you have shared. Tonight, as we come together through cyberspace from our individual atomized homes, we have an opportunity to reimagine anew the world we will rejoin, the shared community that will give us a sense of belonging and nurturing, even as we move beyond the confines of the homes that have sheltered us over the past year. Although many may speak of the return to normal, I want to suggest that it is not a time to think of a return to the past, but rather to commit ourselves to going forward, to positive change, and to developing new strategies for sharing the values on which an enduring and nurturing sense of home can be premised. Tonight's program represents not a conclusion, but a launch pad for the future and for developing new connections with one another. On that note, please join us for our next Maine Art Museum Trail, art program, which will take place on Tuesday, May 4th at 6 o'clock with a presentation by Malian Dana, the first individual to hold the position of the Penobscot Nation Tribal Ambassador. Thank you for your time and for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you, we hope, very soon. Thank you.